Ladies and gentlemen, there is a truth we all know but often try to ignore. No one escapes the consequences of their own actions. You can lie, manipulate, and deceive. You can twist reality to suit your desires. But deep down, in the silence of the night, when the noise of the world has faded, there will be a reckoning. Every choice we make plants a seed in the soil of our own future. Some seeds grow into strong, noble trees, acts of courage, honesty, and discipline. Others fester beneath the surface, forming roots of regret, resentment, and self-deception. You may run from the consequences, but you are running in a circle, and eventually you will meet yourself again. History has shown us time and time again that those who believe they can escape judgment through deception or tyranny are the first to be consumed by their own lies. The person who abuses their power, who betrays those who trust them, who seeks only self-preservation at the expense of others, they may build a fortress of excuses, but they are only locking themselves inside a prison of their own making. There is a reason why those who do great evil often descend into paranoia and suffering. They do not trust anyone because they themselves are untrustworthy. They see deception everywhere because they are liars. They fear betrayal because they have betrayed. And so they are haunted, not necessarily by the people they have wronged, but by the undeniable truth that they are the architect of their own suffering. But there is a way forward. There is a path back to integrity. Though it is narrow and steep, it requires one to stop running, to face the ghosts of past decisions, to take responsibility for every failure, every deceit, and every act of cowardice. It demands the humility to admit wrong and the strength to make amends. This is the only way to lift the weight of one's own actions, to be free from the burden that otherwise will never leave. So I leave you with this. When you act in a way that your future self can bear to remember, because the past never truly disappears. It follows you, for better or for worse, and if you cannot live with the weight of your own actions, then you must change how you act. The inescapable burden of responsibility. Life is a series of choices, each carrying consequences that shape who we are and who we will become. Responsibility is not something we can outrun. It clings to us, whether we acknowledge it or not. Every decision we make leaves a mark, not just on the world around us, but on our very being. To believe that we can act without consequence is a dangerous illusion, one that leads to chaos both internally and externally. People often assume they can avoid responsibility by shifting blame, making excuses, or ignoring the repercussions of their actions. But reality is structured in such a way that responsibility never truly disappears. It is merely transferred, often in ways we do not anticipate. A person who neglects their duty will find that their failures manifest elsewhere, in their relationships, their mental well-being, and their own sense of self-worth. The weight of unfulfilled obligations does not fade with time, it accumulates, pressing down on the individual who refuses to bear it willingly. It is easy to believe that freedom means the absence of responsibility, but the opposite is true. True freedom is found in the acceptance of responsibility, in the knowledge that our actions matter and that we are accountable for them. The burden of responsibility may be heavy, but it is far lighter than the weight of regret. Those who carry their responsibilities with integrity build lives of meaning and resilience, while those who evade them live under the shadow of their own failures, haunted by the knowledge that they have betrayed their own potential. Responsibility is not something we choose to have, it is something we already bear. The only question is whether we will face it willingly or allow it to crush us under its inevitable weight. The long shadow of moral corruption? When a person chooses deception over truth, selfishness over duty, and malice over integrity, they believe, at least for a time, that they have outwitted the natural order. They assume that because they have not yet suffered consequences, they never will. But this is a profound miscalculation. Corruption does not merely taint the external world. It festers within, warping the very structure of the individual who indulges in it. Moral corruption is not a single event, but a pattern, a slow erosion of character that begins with small justifications. A lie told today becomes easier to tell tomorrow. A betrayal rationalized once becomes second nature. Soon, the person who thought they were in control of their deception finds that the deception controls them. Their lies become their reality, their manipulations become their default behavior, and their own mind turns against them, plagued by paranoia and distrust. There is no true escape from moral wrongdoing because the person who commits it must live with themselves. Even if no one else discovers their dishonesty, they know. And knowledge of one's own corruption breeds suffering, an internal war between what they are and what they could have been. Some numb themselves with distractions, addictions, or power, but none of these can silence the quiet, persistent truth that they have chosen the weaker, darker path. It is said that the guilty flee when no one pursues. This is because they are not running from others, they are running from themselves. But no matter how far they go, their own shadow follows. The weight of their moral failures will never leave them, and unless they choose to confront and correct their course, they will be buried under the very darkness they created. This psychological toll of avoidance. People often believe they can bury their past mistakes, that if they refuse to acknowledge them, those mistakes will simply disappear. But avoidance does not erase the past, it magnifies its power. What is ignored does not vanish, it festers, growing stronger and more insidious, like an untreated wound that eventually infects the entire body. The mind is not designed to hold contradictions indefinitely, and when a person refuses to face their wrongdoings, the weight of their unresolved guilt manifests in ways they may not even recognize. Avoidance comes in many forms. Some drown themselves in distractions, work, entertainment, mindless pleasures, all in an effort to keep the mind from confronting the truth. Others lash out, projecting their guilt onto the world, blaming society, their circumstances, or other people for their suffering. Some become bitter and resentful, convinced that life is unfair, when in reality they are suffering from the consequences of their own refusal to take responsibility. Over time, this psychological burden begins to shape a person's identity. They become more anxious, more defensive, more prone to anger and despair. Their relationships suffer because they cannot offer trust or honesty when they are at war with themselves. They may even begin to despise those who act with integrity, because such people serve as a painful reminder of what they have failed to become. The truth is simple but brutal. Avoidance is never a solution. The longer one refuses to face reality, the heavier it becomes. The weight of unaddressed guilt, of denied responsibility, does not diminish over time. It accumulates, pressing harder and harder until it crushes the very person who sought to escape it. The only path forward is through confrontation, through an honest reckoning with one's own past, however painful that may be. Anything less is a slow descent into psychological self-destruction. The redemptive power of accountability. There is no path forward, no true peace, no real strength without accountability. To live without taking responsibility for one's actions is to invite chaos into one's life, to be plagued by the ever-present weight of one's own failures. And yet, many choose this path, not because they do not see the harm they have caused, but because they fear the cost of facing it. What they fail to understand is that the price of avoidance is far greater than the price of accountability. To take responsibility is to voluntarily carry a burden that is already there. Whether one acknowledges it or not, the weight of past actions never disappears. It lingers in the mind, in the way a person speaks, in the way they interact with others, and in the way they perceive themselves. Those who refuse accountability are forever at war with their own conscience, constantly looking for distractions, justifications, and scapegoats to avoid the inevitable confrontation with the truth. They may become bitter, resentful, and paranoid, unable to trust or be trusted. But the moment a person chooses to face their past honestly, something profound happens. The weight that once crushed them becomes something they can bear, not because it disappears, but because they grow stronger. Accountability is painful, but it is also transformative. It forces a person to confront their weaknesses, to make amends, to repair what can be repaired, and accept what cannot. This is the path not only to redemption, but to genuine self-respect. Taking responsibility is not just about righting past wrongs, it is about shaping the future. A person who owns their mistakes is a person who can be trusted. They are someone who has faced hardship and emerged wiser, more resilient, and more capable of guiding others away from the same pitfalls. In a world that is so often defined by deception and cowardice, accountability is a rare and powerful force, one that can lift not only the individual, but those around them. Accountability is partly so while the weight of one's actions may never truly leave, it can be carried with strength and dignity. It can become a source of wisdom rather than regret. But this is only possible when one stops running, stops hiding, and chooses to bear the full responsibility of their existence. And in that choice, there is freedom. The eternal judge within. No one escapes the judgment of their own conscience. It does not matter how skillfully a person deceives others, how elaborate their justifications are, or how much they try to bury the past under distractions, power, or material success. Deep down, they know. They know who they are, they know what they have done, and they know that no amount of external validation can quiet the voice within them that demands truth, justice, and reconciliation. Human beings are wired for self-awareness, whether they like it or not. We are not simply creatures of instinct, reacting blindly to our circumstances. We are thinkers, moral agents, beings capable of profound reflection and self-judgment. This is both our greatest gift and our greatest burden. It means that while we have the ability to create, to improve, and to bring order to the world, we also carry the weight of knowing when we have failed, when we have lied, when we have acted in ways that betray our highest potential. For some, this inner judge is a relentless tormentor. They try to silence it, to drown it out with distractions, indulgence, or self-imposed ignorance. But suppression is not resolution. The truth does not simply go away because it is inconvenient. It lingers, growing stronger in the quiet moments, at night, in solitude, in the seconds before sleep when the mind is left with nothing but itself. The person who has lived honorably, who has confronted their own shortcomings with courage, can rest in those moments. But the person who has built their life on lies and avoidance will find that their mind becomes their prison, a constant reminder of the truth they refuse to face. This is why people who act in deep moral corruption often descend into paranoia and self-destruction. They see enemies everywhere because they have become the kind of person who deserves them. They trust no one because they themselves cannot be trusted. They become restless, anxious, unable to find peace because they have created a reality where peace is impossible. And yet, in all their suffering, they refuse to acknowledge the real source of their torment, themselves. But there is an alternative. The conscience does not only serve as a source of judgment, it is also a guide. It does not exist to torment, but to correct. It speaks to us so that we may listen, learn, and change. And the moment a person stops running and chooses instead to face their own reflection, to take responsibility, to make amends, they will find something remarkable. The conscience that once haunted them will now support them. The judge within will become an ally rather than an accuser. This is the path of true strength, not the strength of avoidance, not the illusion of invulnerability, but the strength of integrity. It is the only way to escape the relentless weight of one's own actions, not by discarding it, but by transforming it into something meaningful. Those who refuse will carry their burden in torment for the rest of their days. But those who listen, who confront, who take responsibility, they will find not just relief, but redemption. And in that, they will finally be free.